When you sit down to write your memoir scenes, how do you begin? What is your first line? And I raise that question because I see this often in my clients, my students writing, and that is to begin their memoirs with a kind of essay-like introduction. And when I teach memoir writing, I focus on the narrative and beginning with the story in the scene and not starting with a school paper kind of essay introduction. So here I have an example from one of my clients, one of my students. She's writing about a marriage she's in. It was an arranged marriage, an Indian marriage. And she starts off with this essay-style introduction that goes, "It had only been 10 months since our engagement, and he had already started acting like a typical husband. All of our arguments were always based on what I should and should not do. Last week we argued loudly, rudely, and aggressively." So what is the essay style thing here? Well, it's kind of the abstract idea of a typical husband. She's setting that up, and we're going to see him as a typical husband. That's what she's trying to argue here. And then she says, all of our arguments were always based on what I should do and should not do. Again, that is a kind of exposition. It isn't a scene. It isn't an action. It isn't, in the moment. It is setting things up in a more abstract way. Now, we get the story actually in the second paragraph. So the story begins, "At 8 a.m, my phone rang." That, I believe, should be moved up to the start of the scene. That's when we should get that. And then she says, "With a loud moan, I picked up the phone. He was on the line. 'It's me, Bawan, your fiancé,' he said." And then she says, "I can recognize your voice." So it's kind of interesting. They're engaged. They're not married yet. It's an interesting way of setting up the scene that he calls and says it's your fiancé. Nowadays, obviously, with smartphones, we would just see the name on the phone. This was written about 15 years ago. So it's a little bit different situation, maybe using a more traditional phone, dial-up phone as we used to have in the past. But see how we do get the story. We know it's the fiancé, and then we get some details about how they're going to meet, and then they meet up in his 2-bedroom basement down here, and then we get some details. What's the matter? And then he says, we've already discussed this about what I would like you to do and what I would not like you to do. I don't like your chatting with other people, especially other men. Then why do you do this every time? There was a brief moment of silence. So see, we have those second and third paragraph where it's a narrative. It's in the moment. It needs editing, but it's got all the details there. And we're getting this interesting feeling about, wow, this is a fiancé. And he's already, checking up on her and making sure that whether she's talking to men or not. But we really didn't need that introduction. We didn't need to be positioned that he's acting like a typical husband at this point. We're going to see that. She's going to show that in the story. So I would just completely delete that and begin the scene with this phone ringing. So just keep that in mind, that when you're starting off your scenes, get to the point, get to the narrative right away. Don't spend a lot of time trying to set it up or position things abstractly.